Pleasure to introduce Ethan Lasser. I've known him longer than he knows. In that in my 20s, I remember him running around his parents' graphic arts gallery on Newbury Street while he was just a tot. And he was clearly already assimilating a love for art. I lost track of him for a while when I moved to New York City. In the meantime, he graduated from Williams. I'm glad to see that there's another Williams grad in here. And got a PhD at Yale, and then did a postdoc teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Madison while curating at the Chipstone Foundation, a house museum in Milwaukee, which is not dissimilar from Winterthur. He resurfaced in my life when he became a curator at the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard in 2012. In 2018, while still at the Fogg, he was a fellow at the Center for Curatorial Leadership, an organization I'm proud to say was co-founded by my sister-in-law, Aggie Gund. He brings us new artists, like a recent Spanish-Mexican surrealist named Remedio Varo, to further enhance and diversify our collection. He's curated shows on the enslaved potter David Drake and Winslow Homer. And his latest is the show up currently called Philip Guston Now, which many of you may have read about, and about which he will tell you more. So with no further ado, here's...
Thank you for that great introduction, Anne. And it took me around on a marvelous afternoon today, too, all through Nantucket. We went to the Lifeguard and Shipwreck Museum, which was a highlight, and a lovely lunch. So great welcome and hospitality, and thanks to Rebecca and the staff here, and of course to Francie, who is hosting me and has invited me to speak. And although I grew up in Boston, as you say, I think this is only my second trip here, so I'll be at the dinner next week. I'm going to stick around. And you're right to say that art is deep in my blood. I didn't know that story when my parents owned print gallery in Boston called Graphics 1 and 2, where they sold Kellys and Motherwells and Picasso prints. And I remember these artists coming and staying with us and signing their editions and looking through the keyhole. And of course, people ask me like, "Oh, you must have you must have so many great prints in your house, the inventory." But what I have are the Carol Summers, the 70s artists that didn't sell. So all the good guys, all the Kelly prints are out there somewhere, maybe in some of your homes. But I believe these artists will one day come back that I've inherited. But it's a delight to be here. It's my first time speaking under a skeleton of a whale. And this juxtaposition was just too good not to take a picture of the great painter Philip Guston, who I'll talk to you about, and about our show called Philip Guston Now, which some of you may know. It's been quite a controversial exhibition with a controversial history, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Guston's art. I hope we can have some debate. The art, the show brings debate, and from what I just heard at the meeting, there's some very smart people in the room tonight, some art historians. I have high expectations for the Williams grad to respond to some of the issues on the table. So Philip Guston Now is at the MFA through September, and for the Houstonians in the room, this will be a bit of a preview because the show comes to you next, I'm delighted to say. And it tells the story of the artist Philip Guston, born in 1913 in Montreal to immigrant parents from the Ukraine, who dies in 1980, one of the great painters of the 20th century. And the controversy maybe needs no introduction, but I'll just dispatch with it here, that in the wake of the tumultuous summer of 2020, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, the show was postponed. The show was postponed because Guston's famous for his paintings of Ku Klux Klansmen, and the 4 museums working on this show felt that they needed more time to prepare the project, and that wasn't the moment. And I'll talk a bit about some of the things we did with that time. I came into the project, as we say, after the pause, and people always say, what's different? And in a sense, I'm different, because I wasn't part of it. But really, we were just a checklist. We were just a group of works when that controversial decision was made. And we have put forward a show that tells Guston's story and that tries to think about our visitors and what they need in new ways. This is going to be a talk about art, though. There'll be a few kind of divergences into the politics of the show, but really this is a show to introduce you, a talk rather, to introduce you to the painter on the screen. Painting, Smoking, Eating of 1973 is one of his iconic works and one of my favorite paintings in the show. A bit different than the decoys we just saw, but it's all American art. And we'll start here. We'll start here. We see the painter lying in bed. It's a self-portrait. He's smoking a cigarette. He's got a pile of, I don't know, French fries, or some people think they're cheese wedges on the bed sheet. And he's lying in bed thinking about this pile of shoes behind him, which for all we know about Guston is a kind of thought bubble. It's his next painting. Shoes were one of his motifs. There's a light bulb. We'll talk more about that light bulb on the left, and a shade cord. And then you see the cans of brushes and this big pink field. And it's a painting about painting. And it's a painting that, for me, belongs almost in the history of works like this, of Rembrandt, except Guston showing himself not at the easel, not in the midst of painting, but thinking about what he's going to do next, sleeplessly thinking about what he's going to do next. And the guy dies, if you did the math, when he's 66. Maybe this also gives you some insight into a reckless life of smoking in bed and eating French fries. But what I'd say, for me, the painting is a good place to begin because it tells you two things you need to know, about the painter and the artist. One is, this is a painter who is obsessed, committed 100% sleeplessly to his medium. Guston would talk about painting for 5 nights at a time. He's painted all night. He was relentlessly productive, relentlessly experimental. Painting for him a place of curiosity, the canvas, but also a kind of journal or a diary where he's processing the world and his own thoughts. And painting always ambiguous, right? What are those, French fries or cheese? Or what is the light bulb doing? Is it a pile of shoes, actual shoes? Is it a painting? Is it an idea for a painting? Guston loves these uncertainties. And ambiguity is a theme we'll keep coming back to tonight. The second thing you need to know is that his is a story with 3 distinct chapters. And this way. I'll talk to you about the phases, the chapters in his work over the course of this talk, in his biography. There's a figurative phase of the 30s and 40s when he's painting paintings like this one, which we'll come back to, called Martial Memory. There is an abstract expressionist phase of the 50s and 60s when Guston's right there with Pollock and de Kooning, a kind of darling of the New York art world, of the Cedar Street bar crowd. And then last, there is this cartoonish phase that I've just shown you, the painting, smoking, eating, the comic book phase of the 70s, a time when this once famous painter has a really a big change in his career. No one's interested in his work anymore, with some important exceptions that I'll talk about. He's going off and doing his own thing. So we'll talk about those chapters. You walk into a show of Guston painting from each moment, it's almost like you're seeing 3 different painters. And yet one of the things we tried to do in our show is also talk about the way that he's always looking back at himself, the way that a painting like Rug of 1976 looks back to the paintings of the 40s, the way that time moves, not like this, 40s, 50s, 60s, but like a loop, as it does for all of us, I think. We're always thinking about things we've done in the past. So I'm going to start in the early part of the career, and we'll make our way through, as we do in the show. And really, this is a teaser for you to come to the MFA and consider this an open invitation. I think it would be pretty hard to get you off this island, but if there's a rainy day, maybe you'll consider it. So the first chapter I'm going to call The Young Painter and the Clan. And we see Guston he's born in Montreal. The family moves to LA. He's a young painter here in his 20s with clearly prodigious talent. And some of you may be thinking immediately of painters that are being referenced here that he's looking at, Italian surrealists. De Chirico is one. Some people are nodding. And what I find remarkable about these paintings is that the 30s in LA, there's not great museums to go to. And really, he's a painter who's looking at, he talks about the time-life treatise of art history. And he's learning about the history of art by flipping the pages of this illustrated treatise. That's where he sees De Chirico for the first time. But he's also doing his own thing. He talked on the right about being a young boy in a turbulent house, and he'd go in a closet when guests came over, and he'd pull the naked light bulb with the cord, and he'd draw. And so that light bulb, which you've seen already, by the end of this, you're going to be an expert in Guston, which you've seen already, reappears at right in this nude. And there's another important point, not just the natural talent, to say about the young artist, and that is his name as the signature on the right, a detail of the shadow of the woman in our surrealist painting suggests. He was born Philip Goldstein. And the first two paintings that we know that are in our show are signed Philip Goldstein. And it's 2 years later, in 1937, under the pressure of anti-Semitism, under the pressure of his own encounters with the Klan, that he changes his name to Guston and drops the L in the Philip. So Philip becomes Philip with one L. And that's a decision, this name change, that was happening all over at the time, but will haunt Guston later in his life, and he'll come back to. So there you see Philip, a rare work signed Philip Goldstein. And the two pictures then speak to his interest in art history. And I'm going to toggle back between showing you works and showing you some of the walls of our exhibition. And I want to show you this work in the center called Pantheon, where the artist later on, in the 70s, goes back and names his pantheon, the great heroes of his time as a painter. Notably, no one from his own time. Pollock's not on there. De Kooning's not on there. He wants to name him. He wants to put himself on the list of the great Renaissance painters, Piero, Masaccio, and there's De Chirico. And I don't know who else is coming to mind for people, but maybe you see the pinks of Piero, of Renaissance painting. You see those arcades of De Chirico. But you also might see something else, and that is the comics. So here's, Guston's all about oppositions. And so he's got his time-life treatise of art history on one hand, but on the other hand, he's reading Crazy Cat. Does that ring a bell for anyone, the comic Crazy? Yes, so some people know it's like, before my time, but apparently the Garfield of its day, a serial that ran for many years, about a love affair, a love triangle between a mouse and a cat and a policeman, and it's all slapstick, brick throwing and violence, and that's all going to become integrated into Guston's work. And you can see on the left the case in the show with the field of pink. Pink is Guston's favorite color, and drawn from Crazy Cat. So he's got art history in one hand, and he's got the comics on the other. And even the blend in that painting of text and image is itself Crazy Cat-ish in character. Here's our light bulb again, by the way. And the other thing that he's drawing on is current events and his own life history. And it's a beautiful summer day, so I hesitate to get into the biography of this guy, which is tough, because as a young man, and I'm showing you the timeline that repeats throughout our exhibition, where we talk about moments in Guston's own life as well as current events that he's responding to. So Guston is 10 years old when his father, who's an immigrant who moves from Montreal to LA, and the young LA in search of work, finds his dad having hung himself. And Guston at age 10 finds him, and it's only a few years later that he's standing with his brother when his brother is hit by a car and soon dies. So, I hate to say, like many artists, he has a very rough upbringing full of trauma. And he's also living in a tumultuous world and keeping his eye on issues of violence and social justice and the Holocaust and Klan violence, and these all figure into his work as a young artist. And one of the first things we present in our show is a mural, a reproduction of a mural that Guston paints in Mexico. And I was happy to already be talking about, who's I talking to already about Latin American, about Mexican painters and the three great muralists. So to give you a sense of the small world of the art world of the 30s, here's young Philip in his 20s, fresh from childhood traumas, driving around LA, and he sees an artist painting a mural on a building in LA, and it turns out that that's David Siqueiros, the great Mexican muralist, and they hit it off, and Guston is invited to Mexico with his friend Ruben Cottish to paint a mural at a university. It's still there. Anyone been to Morelia? You have, all right. So we'll have to talk about that. I understand it's in pretty compromised condition, the mural, 1935, called The Struggle Against Terrorism. And we can see a name for our time. It's 40 feet. It's a huge mural. And we see what will become for the artist some of his abiding interests and themes. And in the center is we're collapsing kind of centuries of violence into one field. So we have the Inquisitor. Do I have a pointer on here? Let's see. Yeah, right here. This is the hooded Inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition, throwing his cross down at his prisoners. And next door is the ascendant Klansman holding the swastika, being defeated by the hand of communism. I told you it wasn't going to be a light Nantucket night, but there's more to come. And so this is the first appearance of the hood in Guston's work, the hood that will become for him a motif that he's going to take and resurface in the 70s. And it's a painting it's a mural, one of his only murals that you can still see, that really helps him work out things that he's going to take into his easel painting. So here's one of these figurative works we've seen, what Guston called, now in St. Louis, where he's teaching, my first mature easel painting, my first accomplished easel painting. And what we see in martial memory are a group of boys. They're in costume. They're wearing teapots as helmets and hats and hoods. We've seen hoods already. And they're wearing Icarus wings. And they seem to have been pausing. It's a strange painting. They're pausing in the midst of a fight. One's holding a garbage can lid, and they're crowded together in the canvas. There's even a little hint of cubism in this cascade of bricks and Edward Hopper back there. So you can see an artist, although he doesn't want to acknowledge it, looking at other artists around him. And for me, this is a work that points forward in very direct ways to what we're going to see next, right, to the next chapter. The crowding of the field in a figurative painting, not so different from the crowding, the piling of paint in the abstract painting to come. As I said, the breaks maybe aren't as distinct as they seem, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So I like to think of him as a reluctant abstractionist. He's not Pollock, who's all in, or de Kooning, who's committed to painting abstractly. For Guston, there's always this kind of edge of, do I want to paint and engage with the world, or do I want to be with this New York crowd who is committed to paint for its own sake, to art for its own sake? And we can see that in early painting. So here's the great thing about being a curator and bringing things together that you've thought about so long is that you suddenly open up, as here, sight lines. So I see this, but behind it I see the work of the 30s, and it's just electric when you start to see the way paintings talk to each other in ways you can't predict. So here we see the most mature abstractions, but they're in the shadow of some of the works I showed you that he's painting as a young artist. And you realize all of a sudden, like, hey, same hand, very different, but same hand for sure. So why, we wondered, was this early work from New York from 1947, a work that recalls the artist, for me, Gottlieb, if you know that name. We talked about Gottlieb, Anne. Why is it called The Tormentors? We were puzzled about that title. And at a moment when other artists are saying like Untitled number 5 or number 1 Pollock, and we were researching the kind of Guston bibliography, and in 1946, just before he paints this, he's awarded the Carnegie Prize for painting, esteemed award. And in a good story, actually, before I reveal my sense of this title, is that Guston gets this prize, and he is so ashamed now as an abstractionist by the figurative work for which he receives the award that he destroys it. So we don't even have the painting anymore for which he is awarded that prize. He turned his back on his early work in a very dramatic way. But we buy the Life magazine. This is a good story about actually archives and research. we buy the Life magazine, in which he's announced as the winner of the Carnegie Prize. And the page before, no one had noticed this, the page before that article is a story about the Klan and its resurgence, something we knew would have been interesting to Guston, but we certainly knew he would have seen it because it was the page before his article. And then we were puzzling over this shape, and there's another one down here, and we realized that this painting is really abstract, yes, but also referencing that Klanhood that is so central to what Guston will do as an artist. So the tormentors refer, I think, to the hoods that are on the edge, right, inside the abstraction. And the fact that they're in this magazine with him helped us to solidify our hunch. Now, I said I promised a few divergences into questions of museums and curation. And I wanted to say a word about how he displayed the magazine, which has been controversial, as much of Guston's work is. We decided early on that sometimes against what we were being advised in the wake of the postponement, we were not going to censor or hide any painting by the artist. But we were advised by groups that we workshopped the show with that if there was a contextual image that might strike a nerve with someone, might upset someone, we should let the visitor have a choice to see it or not. So my argument, now some would say I'm hiding the image anyway, so we put this Klan thing in this vitrine with a cover. And there's another set of images of the Holocaust that Guston sees that are similarly displayed. And for us, it's a way for visitors to decide. For example, my colleague, who is African-American, was walking her daughter through the show and didn't want to get into it with her 8-year-old about this, and was very grateful for this box. Others have said, you guys are covering up history. So as I said, we're going to have this debate after the talk. You can respond. Abstraction comes, though. The reluctant abstractionist goes 2 years later, Tormentors, 1948, 1950. He's painting across the canvas. This painting is called Red Painting. It is giving Guston a great critical success in New York, and it leads the way to the next series, which for me are among the most beautiful paintings of the late 50s and 60s, where the artist has moved from red to blue and is piling paint on in the center of the canvas. And actually what you see in this painting called Fable, holding on to the title, right? The title that suggests there's some story here. But the fable, to me, would just seem to be the painting itself. And he's working in from the edges. So raw, naked canvas working in from the edges. And when you come see the show, this is the most beautiful room in the show. It's like the water lilies. It's like Monet's water lilies, seeing these paintings together. This one called Passage from 1958. So, if you know your history of abstract expressionist painters, there's Pollock, who's spreading out, spreading paint over, dancing around the canvas. Guston's philosophy is different. It's working in toward the center, piling paint up. And he actually uses that expression of the pile up. And when I went to his studio, which still exists in Woodstock, New York, last winter, I opened a cabinet. It's as it was when he died in 1980. And you open a cabinet, and there were, I think Anne's been there, some 500 tubes of cadmium red paint. And I was very touched that his daughter gave me one of the tubes, and just to show you how much material he used. And he tells, and it's still there, cadmium red, but he tells a story about when he's in New York, his studio is adjacent to the then older painter Stuart Davis, a painter of a different generation, a painter of the Jazz Age. And Davis says to him, like, "You're using too much paint. What are you doing? Where are you getting the money for all this?" And you can see why. They're like cakes. It's like frosting. So here we are in others of these late 50s paintings. This one's called, which is owned by the daughter of the original owner, is called Grove. And this one's called Painter. And maybe you can even see the hint of a painter with his hat, holding his brush. And it's in the midst of painting these in the 60s, when Guston he's like an artist today where you have to line up for his paintings. He's having great critical success. He is the darling of the New York art world. that he has a TV in his studio. And some people here may have lived through the summer of 1968, which, as I understand it, was a summer much like maybe this summer will be, but summers of the past, summers of turmoil and upset of Kent State and the Democratic National Convention and Nixon and Vietnam. And Guston has a TV in his studio, and he's watching these images as he's painting these abstractions. And we've recreated that in the show, protest and violence in the streets. And it's in the midst of that he famously and poignantly says this quote, this line, remembering being in the studio, the TV on one side, the easel on the other, what kind of man am I, sitting at home, reading magazines, and going into a frustrated fury about everything, and then going home, he says, and then going home to adjust a red to a blue. Of course, it's the dilemma of every artist I know today, right? Like, what does it mean to be a painter in 2022? And I think this line from the past is so resonant for artists now, and many artists revere Guston for it. So we asked this question, like, what do these paintings mean? None of his peers are grappling with this in quite the same way, but you can imagine maybe it's a dilemma we've all gone through in different ways in our lives, but what it means to paint for paint's sake, paint to believe in the idea that art can be disengaged from the world, but then to have the world creep in. And so what happens after asking this question, what kind of man am I? A question that leads our narrative in many ways. What happens is unexpected. Because what, you would expect, having heard that he's going to go out and march in the streets or paint, paintings against the war. But what Guston starts to do, curiously, is to paint these small paintings, which he calls the alphabet panels, there in the summer of 1968. And he's painting common things around him, some of which by now you'll recognize. Anyone see anything that we've already talked about? Shoes, light bulbs. I knew I was going to create a group of Guston experts. I'm delighted. Yeah, the light bulb is at upper right. You see a shoe. We'll talk more about the shoes. You see the back of his head, bottom left. You see bricks. Say? Bricks. Yeah, bricks from Crazy Cat. Yeah, this is a good crowd. I missed what you said. When you stand in a show, again, to bring you to the electricity of the sight line, like, how could this happen, you might say? How could one possibly go from this to this? Guston explains it by saying that he felt an urge for his work to come from things, from the graining of wood, the feeling of stone, from the corruption and violence of the world. So for him, it's about, I was taking a friend around who's a therapist, a mental health expert recently, and she was saying, yeah, I get it. Like, when in times of trauma, we want the solidity of the things around us. So perhaps that's what it's about. You may have your own responses, but we could say it's a very radical break, for sure. And it's a break that sets up for what's going to happen next. And that brings me to the third chapter of this talk, which centers on a show at the Marlborough Gallery, some of you may know, in 1970, when Guston displays for the first time the work that is going to come out of his new direction. And he's in Boston, actually, getting an honorary degree from Boston University on the eve of this. And I met the Professor Sidney Hurwitz, who was the painting professor who invited him and gave the degree. And he said they're sitting at dinner in 1969 at a deli in Brookline. Guston was a big eater. He had a big brisket sandwich. And he says to Sidney, like, I just want you to know, I'm painting something pretty different now. Do you still want to give me this degree? And he leaves it at, ambiguous guy that he is, he leaves it at that. And Hurwitz, of course, proceeded, but had no idea what was coming. And in another little story about the politics of museums today, because what's coming are these Klan paintings, these hooded figures, these cartoonish paintings, the subject always of controversy. We felt some pressure to give visitors a way out. So if you don't want to see them, I'm just showing you this by way of some of our curatorial strategies. You can exit and re-enter. Now, anecdotally, I would say I haven't seen a single person do this. If anything, it's had the reverse effect. But we wanted people to know what was coming. And so we even did this little card. The card, if you've read about the show, has gotten the ire of some people in the art world. I believe in the card. We can talk about it. The card is meant to say, I don't like the word trigger warning. That was not what we intended. But it's a way of saying, hey, there's some hard stuff coming up. We hope you'll have some hard conversations, and here are some resources to have those conversations. It's a way of signaling that the paintings are different and difficult, and that's what Guston wanted them to be. Because when you turn the corner, if you've decided to enter the room, and by the way, this is a setup for you too. The Klan hoods are here. What he comes out with in 1970, and you have to imagine yourselves, right? In 1968, you've seen the paintings, the blue abstractions that I've shown. You return to your next Philip Guston show 2 years later, and you see these huge paintings of Klansmen in this cartoonish style, unlike, for my money, anything in the art world at the time, maybe except Crazy Cat. And what do you say? What do you think? Well, let's think about the paintings and what they might mean, and then we'll get to what people said, which is quite interesting. So the first painting is called City Limits, which shows these 3 cartoonish hooded figures driving around. By the Window, which shows a lone man smoking a cigarette at home. And Blackboard, which I think is the most resonant painting of all, which shows a group of hooded figures on a blackboard, indicating that this is part of teaching. And Blackboard's notable. Before we get into what that might mean, I just say, look at the paint on that. Look at the pink paint. And you see that maybe that abstract painter is not so far away. He still loves his brushes and his paint. And in the center of the room, after this triptych of Klansmen at home, Klansmen driving around, paintings that would seem to be about the ubiquity of racism, of violence. Maybe you have different interpretations. For me, the center painting is particularly poignant because it seems to be like these guys go home too. That they have, you could become one of them just like that. That they have a domestic life just like you do. Almost familiarizing the Klansmen to show how easy it is to slide into that way of thinking. And Guston does that in another way too. So in the center of the gallery, we've created a room within a room, and it is a replica of Guston's studio, which I mentioned. By the way, that's the cabinet with all the paint. Here's the wall where he stretched his canvases. This is in Woodstock, New York, in the country, where Guston leaves in the summers. And that's the wall where he stretched his painting, including, and there, by the way, you've seen this too, this teapot on the head of the young boy in martial memory of 1941. So that's a familiar object. You've probably seen the cans of brushes too in my favorite painting, Painting, Smoking, Eating. It's where he paints this painting called The Studio, which is the heart of this group and the heart of the Marlborough show. And maybe the most complicated painting to unravel in this group, a painting that shows the hooded artist painting the hooded artist. And what can we say about it, this self-portrait? One that belongs for me in this group of Guston self-portraits and even in that Rembrandt I showed. And it is by all accounts Guston. He's smoking a cigarette. We see the light bulb. We see, I haven't talked about the green shade yet, but that's another recognizable motifs. And he is, in his own cartoonish language, caught red-handed, right? He's that literal with his Mickey Mouse glove. And you can see the blood stains on the robe of the Klansman. And you can see the stitching from the tormentors. And this seems to me a painting of Guston, yes, a self-portrait of the artist, but when you stand in front of it, it's also a painting of us. That is, you are the one he's painting. And it seems to me to be a painting about what it means to be in the studio, what it means to be a witness. When does the edge of not speaking up shift into complicity? When are you, as a painter on the street, as Guston would say, just as bad as them? And Guston doesn't tell us much about what he means here, and maybe you have different interpretations than I do. I'm interested in this idea of so ahead of his time, Guston telling us that the edge of white supremacy is so close, and one of the reasons I believe in that interpretation is that we found this in Guston's studio. He lived with this reproduction of a Piero painting of a Renaissance, one of his great hero, Piero, and so Guston lives with this reproduction, which we've borrowed for the show. And there's many things to say about why this attracted him. And we know he lived with it from his daughter for his whole life, that it was up there. And so what does this painting have to say to a painter of the studio? And of course, the first thing my eye went to was the pink figure at left, pink, the great Guston color, pink, a color that he uses throughout his body of work. And the reason there were 500 tubes of red is that that's how he mixed his paint, his pink. But it is a painting about witnessing. So these three figures here are just shooting the breeze while Christ is flogged behind. And that seems to me so key to understanding this painting, that what it is to be a witness. We're all witnesses, we're all bystanders, and are we therefore complicit in the very violence of the Klansmen? That seems to be the question Guston is asking. Now, in 1970, when these are shown, the critics are outraged. The show is panned. He loses his career. With few exceptions, he doesn't sell a painting for the next decade. And what is it they're so angry about? Not what we're angry about in 2020 or concerned about, which is the potential offensiveness of this content and what it means to show this work in a museum, but rather what upsets the critics is that Guston has returned to painting figuratively, that he's betrayed abstraction. His best friend, who's the composer Morton Feldman, an avant-garde composer, never talks to him again. So the feeling of betrayal is so charged that Feldman doesn't reappear in Guston's life until his funeral in 1980. And for me, like, it's such an interesting response because in some sense it just validates Guston's point that all these white critics are writing about his return to figuration and missing what he's trying to do. I want to talk about two more paintings that are in this gallery and were part of this Marlborough show. And I'll start with the one on the right, which is called Cellar from 1970. And I'm very delighted to say that there's someone in here who knows much more about this painting than me, Anne Gund, who owns this painting. And I heard today the story of the acquisition, and when you were telling me how you bought that in the mid-70s, it occurs to me that you were one of the only collectors supporting Guston at that time, because no museums, people were showing, David McKee Gallery was showing his work, but no one was acquiring it out of this sense of betrayal of abstract expressionism. And it's a remarkable painting and introduces us to a few things. First is the shoe. And Guston told stories of his family hiding in the cellar during the pogroms, right? When they were still in Ukraine, they'd hide in the cellar. And he'd also seen an exhibition of photographs of the concentration camps and thinks and draws about these piles of shoes. And of course, we see shoes throughout this painting, the bottoms of shoes. And if you want a particularly dark reading of that iconography, which we'll send you upstairs for a drink before I finish. The darkest reading, the saddest reading of the shoes is that Guston at age 10 is looking up at his dad and sees the bottom of his shoes, and that just sticks with him. It's just in his heart. I also like this painting because there's I don't know if this is an arm or a leg, but for all intents and purposes, and so Guston, it's a question mark, right? That shape here. But the best thing to see is the paint, because when you come up to this painting, as I did yesterday, looking at it again, I was just like seduced by the brushstroke. And you can see it on the bottom here. You can see it in this figure in the bottom of the shoes. You can see it beautifully in all the different layers of the painting and all the different ways he's applied paint. Even in the most gruesome imagery of bloodstains, you're sort of seduced by the action of this painter. Here's the top of that question mark in Cellar from 1970. I'm actually making an argument for why you have to come see the show in person, because the slide, you can't see any of this in slides. But in a way, every work has that quality, including the next work shown adjacent to it called The Deluge, which is our only Guston here at the Museum of Fine Arts, apparently, in another good story that can't be repeated, a Guston, who's in Boston at BU again, offers the then curator, I don't know who it was, we can all judge our predecessors, one of his figurative paintings from his late work, one like that painting, The Rug. And the curator says, "That's very kind of you, but what I really want is one of the abstract expressionist paintings from the 50s. And Guston walks away, infuriated that a museum won't take his late work. And it's not till his death that his wife gives us this painting in 1992. So when I think about what we could have had, but I'm sure they're saying about that about me too, or they will. So the painting is remarkable. It's one of the only ones that Guston actually talks about. And he says, I wanted to sink the whole world like it was doomed. And what we learned is that, so you see this, I'll come to what we learned, but this is a field, a Black Sea. The painting's named for a flood, and floating on top of the Black Sea are some of these Guston motifs, a little painting, a tube of paint, a spider, a sun, up to you to decide what that is. And he talks about flooding out, and it is a vigorously painted painting, large painting. And what we learned looking at the painting recently was that he did flood something out, that in fact visible under the paint is a painting that he painted over, as he often did, erased. And here's our conservator, Rona Macbeth, looking at these horizontal lines. And what she found were 3 hoods. So underneath the sea were 3 clan hoods. Notable, visible to the naked eye, and actually you can see us looking at them together when we made the discovery. Really exciting, by the way. Exciting, but also we realized that this painting had been in our collection since 1992, and we were only seeing this now, which seemed to, of course, just solidify Guston's point that, this is all in the water, hidden in plain sight. And so we've made a lot of this painting and what it might mean. That's a lot to take. I'm not going to end yet, but I will. We do take a breath in our show and let people share their interpretations, share their thoughts. There are many. We don't come down one way or another on what these paintings mean, and we wanted the audience to respond to them. And this is our wall of cards that visitors have submitted, and I'll walk you through some of them. But I'm very proud to say we now have, I'm not kidding, 2 months, 6,000 submissions, which isn't a huge number because a lot of people have been coming to the show, but is a huge number. And we've just partnered with data analysis, what are they called? Digital humanists at Northeastern who are going to analyze these for us and understand what people are responding to. But you can see some of them. Guston was my teacher. Magnolia learned about the Ku Klux Klan. We're all dealing with trauma. People are talking about what they're seeing in the artist. People are talking about what the paintings mean to them. We're getting people, in every way, the work, the curatorial choices are polarizing. So here's someone referring to the boxes I showed and saying, keep the doors open. And here's someone saying about the very same room, I love this room. I love that the museum is staging the work. Good stuff. That's one I keep that one up when I don't know, I should show you this one. And then people are drawing. They're drawing in a very Guston-like spirit. So it's kind of incredible, the response. It makes me be very proud to be a curator at the Museum of Fine Arts. That I sort of doubted my colleagues who were encouraging this. I thought it would be a lot of like, hi, Mom, and, Jim loves Susie. But in fact, people are taking this very seriously, and there's sort of a public debate playing out in image and text before us. And you can see even the images are Guston-related in one way or another. So when you come, you must contribute and share your thoughts. And I'll end with a few works from the last decade. And the last decade is a curious time. You know, most artists I've worked on, at the end of their lives, they kind of peter out. They become a bit more complacent. They found their groove. There's not the fire, maybe, that there was. It's the opposite for Guston. It's as if the decline of his critical reputation is liberating. And from age 56 until his death, and at age 66, from 1970 to 1980, he paints 2/3 of his paintings. And he refers to his own manic pace of staying up all night. He's not a painter who plans, from all we can tell. He just goes for it. And the paintings are big, and they're vigorous. And some of them, they continue to get shown. Many of them don't get collected. And if you come in this room, you'll see every painting is private. Most of the paintings are private collection because they're still in the estate. But it was as if not to have that pressure of critical success was liberating. And we see some of the great works. And we see returns, right? I talked about returns. So in the 70s, Guston's returning to the shoes. This is painter's forms. A bit of a revolting painting about chewing. I love this painting because for years as a teacher, I talk about what the artist does is chew the world up and spit it out. And then Guston just visualizes that metaphor. So I felt an immediate connection to this work, although it's a gruesome content showing the legs and shoes, and we can talk about what that might mean. Here's one, another one called Rug from 1976. And when Guston's asked about these leg paintings in an interview from Roberta Smith, still then and still now critic of the New York Times, he is just charmingly, wonderfully evasive, as he often was, and says, like, no, she's asking him, what is this about the Holocaust? What do the shoes mean? And he says, no, it's just, what the key to these paintings are the spaces between. It was just a puzzle of composition. And the piles of legs allowed me to play with foreground and background. The complete garbage answer, but I think Guston's way of saying, like, it's your job to interpret what I do. I just paint. And Roberta Smith demurs and moves on to something else. We brought some early works back in because Guston talks about his late work in terms of the piling up of memory, something we can all, I think, understand, the way that memories cloud and pile up. And of course, he was piling up paint earlier on, and I think in these juxtapositions of a work from the 50s, like the ones we've seen, and a work from the 70s, you can see, yes, abstract to figurative, but the palette's the same, and the way he's massing things together is the same as well. So here's Tower from 1970, and I thought I'm going to let Guston have the last word with a film clip, but I thought we'd just end here because it's such a meaningful painting, part of that Marlborough show. And it's a painting I'm sure you can all respond to at this point, having now some sense of his distinctive iconography, because we see the red hand, and the red hand is pointing us toward this tower of shoes and body parts. There's a pirouetting foot at the top. There's a bit of humor in these things too. Important to say, like they're cartoons after all. In fact, the challenge of the paintings is that they're so humorous on the one hand and so gruesome on the other. Tools, this is a canvas, so tools of painting, shoes, feet. But, my question to you all now as Guston connoisseurs is, what is he painting us away from? Does anyone recognize that shape covered over? Yes, it's a hood. So it's a here we have excellent work. We have a. I knew I was I heard that this is a smart crowd in here. So thank you. Anyone who would give up a sunny afternoon knows how to look at a painting. So I appreciate it. You've nailed it. He's painted over a hood, but in this case, not to unlike our painting The Deluge, where it's obscured. In this case, he wants us to see it clearly. And here's the hood and the stitching and the blood stains smeared out, and the hand is pointing us away. It's just such a meaningful work to me about what he's trying to do, which is say how easy it is to look away, right? How so important for us to hear, I think, this summer in 2022, how easy it is for us to look away as the hoods are in the water. as violence and racism is always there. And what does it mean to look away? I want to give him, though, the last word. He's a talker as well as a painter.
I love painting. I mean, painting is my life. Painting is what I live for. There's too much of a love affair in modern art, you know? Painters could put down some swatches of color and everybody responds. I think I wanted more and more specificity. I think when I paint this or that, I'm still in 1940 or 50 or in the 50s, you know. I mean, I know what I'm going to do. That's why the comments about style sound strange to me, you know. You work in this style or in that style, as if you had a choice in the matter. What you're doing is trying to stay alive and continue and not die. I mean, what you want is an experience of making something that you haven't seen before. I want it to be more like the art of the past that I liked. I mean, a Montagne painting doesn't care if 500 spectators fall off a cliff. You know, it's there. And so it goes. There's some mysterious process at work here which I don't even want to understand. I know that if I stopped painting and became a psychologist of the process of making, I would probably understand it more, but it wouldn't do me any good. I don't want to understand it like that.
Thank you. I love it. It's just survival. You have to keep going. So I'll close there and invite you all to Boston. Thank you.